Okay, it is 12:30, so I'm going to kick us off here. So I'm happy to welcome Adam Saffer, who is a member of the Strategic Communication faculty at the University of Minnesota's Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communication. As a communication network researcher, Saffer explores questions about how individuals, groups, and organizations use and are influenced by communication networks. Saffer's work has been published in journals, including New Media and Society, Journal of Communication, Journal of Computer Mediated Communication, and American Behavior Scientist. His PhD is from the University of Oklahoma's Gaylord College of Journalism and Mass Communication. So with that, I will let Adam take things over.
Thank you. Yeah, this is great to be jumping in here. I'm sorry that I haven't been able to participate more, but teaching has been taking up quite a bit. So I'm excited to be with everyone today. So what I want to do is I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. So I have a couple of ground rules. If you could please entertain me with these, it will just kind of help me out as I talk about this and we go through things. So please be as interactive as possible. If I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, or if you want to interrupt me, unmute yourself, do whatever you want, raise your hand. I will gladly try to get to you and clarify anything. So your engagement would be greatly appreciated. All right. So I'm going to be talking about visualizing networks with overlapping groups. So this is something that I've been doing more recently with my research on network analysis. And I think that it's really powerful because of the way that we're able to use the data. All right. So I kind of have two objectives for the talk today. Is one, I want you to understand conceptually the reasons why why it might be helpful to visualize networks where nodes have multiple connections and membership in multiple groups. And then I want to be able to apply the R script and the resources for visualizing where nodes with multiple connections and membership in multiple groups, like how you can do that, right? So I've put together the R script and everything for that to be shared, right? But in order for this to make sense, I kind of need a read of the room for where people are in terms of networks and relational data. So if you could just kind of give me like a thumbs up if you have worked with networks and relational data in the past. So if you could use the reaction button, that would be helpful. If you could just give a thumbs up if you have used either network or relational data in the past. Not seeing much. Got one, two. All right, Todd, thank you. All right, three. All right, so I'm gonna just go over the basics, seeing that the majority of people have not worked with relational data before, okay? So I'm just gonna walk through the very basics of how we build networks, right? So some of the terms that I'm gonna use are nodes, ties, dyads, and a network, obviously, because we're talking about networks. So at the very, very basic level, you have a node, okay? In the most general of terms, these are gonna be things that are within the network. And examples of this is like persons, right? So we could study the network of this Zoom room right now, okay? We could ask who knows who in this room, or let's say if we're able to get the data, who's having direct messages with each other during this room, and we'd have those connections, right? So the nodes here are people, and the connections would be their communication, right? But nodes can also be an organization. It could be an artifact, right? Those nodes have important attributes, like we could do gender, we could do age, we could say what company you're coming from today, what category or industry is that company classified as. All of those data are really important. Those attributional data are really important whenever we're thinking about networks. One, for explaining why connections form, how they form, but also visualizing, which we're going to focus on today, right? So the tie is how those things are connected, right? And whenever we look at tie, oftentimes people just think that, oh, it's a connection and that's all that matters. But there's also attributes within that tie that are really relevant. It could be the directionality of the tie. Did I send a tie to Lisa And did she return that tie, right? So the directionality of a tie, that attribute can be really, really important. We could also do something like the strength of a tie. So if I have multiple communications with Lisa, we could see that that tie increases in size because of the multiple communication, right? So whenever we have, like the example that I just gave with Lisa and I communicating, we have a dyad, right? And so dyads look at pairwise relationships. And this is the fundamental unit of network data collection. We take all of the dyads and then we assemble them together, and that's where we get this network level. We can put together networks, all right? So whenever we look at networks, we can look at like how cohesive they are in terms of like statistics associated with network analysis. We can also break networks into subgroups or subnetworks. We can look at cliques. And then we can even jump all the way back down to the nodal level and look at where individuals are positioned, okay? So that's kind of a big picture of how we build networks. I wanna just take a deep dive into the important parts of these. And I want to pause and ask you all to do an activity at the end here just to make this apply, all right? So again, nodes are referred to as actors, vertices, or alters, okay? Nodes have many connections and attributes, like I was just saying. They can also come in different modes, all right? So whenever I say that nodes can come in different modes, that means that I can be a node as a person, and then I can be connected to an organization, which is a different mode of a node, right? So you can have kind of nested data in that sense, right? So I have more examples here of what nodes are, individuals, groups, teams, organizations. You can even do how nations are connected, or you can do artifacts. Like we can look at how news articles or scholarly articles are connected, how websites are connected. So what I want to do is just, for those of you, participating in everything, if you could just put in the chat, what is an example of a node that might be relevant to your work? So can you think of a person, a type of node, and just put it in the chat, all right? Give a couple of minutes. Ben says county, good. A gene, all right, interesting. Species, yep, good. Health plan, great. Department at a university, yeah. Oh, lakes, yeah. Okay, interesting. I've not. That's one outside my area, but good. Okay, others, mothers, babies, yes, great, excellent. Brain region sensors, wow, yeah, okay, really outside my area. All right, so now that you have a node in mind, what I want to do next is I want to think about how that node or those nodes are connected to one another. And this is where it can get a little bit tricky. Obviously, since I'm coming from a media background, I'm going to think about the communication between nodes, right? So whenever we talk about the ties among nodes, this is also referred to as relations, connections, edges, or arcs, all right? And like I was saying earlier, these ties can have different attributes in terms of directionality. So you can see over here on the side, I've visualized a tie on the far left there's no directionality, then there's one that's directional, and then you can see there's the different sizes of the width of the tie changes to indicate a different attribute, okay? So examples of how nodes are connected could be interpersonal relations, it could be interorganizational relationships, it could be hyperlinks between the nodes, it could be for news articles, you could look at how authors of news articles are connected by their authorship. If they co-author together, then they become connected, or what we would call a co-occurrence, right? So now what I want you to do is, using the example of the node that you had, I want you to think about how are those connected? In what ways are they connected? And put that in the chat. So while you do that, I'm going to get a little bit more coffee. So how are those nodes connected? So with lakes, it could be canals, I guess. It could be rivers connecting the lakes. Okay, great. Got with departments similarity, right? With departments, you could do multiple affiliations. If faculty have multiple affiliations, yeah, streams, watersheds. Okay, yep, transcriptional regulation, great. Feedback, good, good, good. patients, doctors, yeah, neighbors, relatives, all right, how they're connected to within their counties. Okay, great, excellent. So with that in mind, what I want to do now is just start focusing, now that you have a node that you're thinking of and how it's connected, is I want to start thinking about how we can visualize those connections. So there's a whole set of network procedures that would focus on studying with quantitative statistics, like how those connections have some kind of impact on an outcome variable, all of that good stuff. But what we're going to focus on today is visualizing the basic network graph. So what I have done, and this would be a good spot if you want to follow along in the R script, is to open up the R project file, right? And Lisa, in the other breakout rooms, have they been doing this where they follow along with the R script?
Yep, there's kind of been a variety, but you can certainly do
Okay.
that. And I will actually post a link to the GitHub page as well,
Okay.
even though you already have the Google Drive.
Yeah. I just want to have multiple. Yeah. So if you could, if you go ahead and open up the project, the R project file for this, I'm going to share that so you all can see what it looks like. Get my mouse to work. Right. So you should have a folder like this. You can pull up the R project file. Right. And then
Adam, I think we're still seeing your slides. You might have to reshare.
Thank you. All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Can I get a couple of thumbs up once everyone has this open? Thanks, Grace, Grant, Lisa, Ben, good. Thanks, Todd. Got Max, Steve, great, awesome. Okay, I think that's a majority by my unofficial count. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is we're just going to install a couple of packages. The ones that we're going to primarily be using for the visualization are going to be iGraph, ggplot, gggraph, and then the rcolor brewer. But also just for accessing the data through the Google Sheet that I have, or the Excel file, whichever you want. I've also included the packages for that. So if we just go ahead, obviously install that, and then run the libraries too. Okay. All right, should be good there. All right, so the first thing is we need to bring in the data, right? So let me pause and give you a little bit of background on the data that we're going to use here. Okay, so this data, or these data, come from a survey of NGOs that are working in Malaysia. And so what we did is we went in and surveyed them before the pandemic, and we asked them, who among this network of NGOs have you worked with in the past year? And so we gave them a roster of all of the NGOs, and they selected which ones they worked with. And then as they were filling out that survey, they also identified issues that they work on. So this network was primarily about government reform, but within that, there was specific groups of NGOs that were working on issues of like good governance, issues of security, issues related to Indigenous people and minority groups, right? So we had them, fill out a normal survey, but the thing that's different is you were looking at how they were all connected, right? So hopefully that gives you like a big picture idea of where this data or what these data are, okay? So in that, whenever we are looking at the nodes, in this case, it would be the organizations, all right? So the organizations here are the nodes, and the people that completed the survey were representatives from those organizations. So first thing that we're going to do is we are going to bring in the node data set. I'm going to just load that in. I'm going to use the Read Excel one because that's my preferred. If you want to use the Google Sheet one, you should be able to access it through this this line of code, right? So let's have a look at what this looks like. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page of how the data are structured, right? So pretty standard, we have the ID, we have whether they completed the survey or not. Then we have the different types of organizations that they're represented. So like civil society, or if they're an international NGO, all of that good stuff. The state, the size of their organization, funding, or excuse me, founding, age. And then the stuff that we're going to work with today is going to be their issues, okay? So they could select 2 of the most important issues that their organization works on, right? Are we good here? Has everyone been able to load those data? Yeah. All right, Ben. Oh, thank you, Ben. Okay, Grace, got it. If you're having trouble, if you want me to pause for a second, give a thumbs up now. Good. All right, I'm seeing none, so I'm gonna jump on to bringing in the ties. Okay. Here, this is where whenever they went through the survey and they identified all of the other organizations that their organization worked with, they indicated the ties, right? So you can, again, there's 2 different options for how to bring that in. This is the way that I had it, right? So the way that these data look like is going to be right here, right? So you have a column for from and to, right? And these are just identifying the IDs, right? So the data down here, 1 is organization 1 connected to organization 9, right? Then the partner's issue is what issue organization 1 perceived 9 to work on. So this one is going to be labor rights. Then over here, you have all of these measures for how strong the relationship was in terms of communication value, how much influence did this partner have in the network, how collaborative they are, how likely are you to exchange information, all of that good stuff, right? What we're just going to work on today are the first 3 columns, right? But I just wanted to show you how relational data can be set up here, right? So if everyone is good with that, if you're having trouble, give me a thumbs up. I'll pause for a second. If there's any questions at this point, I'll take them now, because we're gonna, the next step is we're gonna create a graph object. Are there any questions? Nope. All right, let's move on. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do before we can visualize it is we need to create a graph object, right? So this is where we are going to start using the iGraph package, right? iGraph is one of the more commonly used network analysis packages. Another one referred to as network or SNA is another great one, but I prefer, and most people in my field use iGraph. And so what this is going to do is going to create a unique type of object based off of the ties, right? So I'm just going to explain this function here. So the function is we are going to graph from a data frame, right? So the ties that we imported, that is coming in as a data frame class of object, right? And all I want it to do is select, I'm using the dplyr right here. I want it to select from and to, and then I'm telling it that this network is directed, right? So the ties in this network indicated either who was sending the tie and who received the tie. So the sender is from and the receiver is to. And then the last thing that we're going to bring in is the parameter for vertices, okay? So vertices, again, the reason why I wanted to cover the basics for network terminology means nodes, right? And so we're telling the package that the vertices for the ties are in the nodes object, right? Does that make sense? We get a couple of head nods. Thanks, Lisa. Ben, is that making sense since you got your video on? Yeah. Okay. So if we run this line 79 here, okay, so we have a graph object, and I just want to show you what it looks like, right? So just in the console down here. Okay, so we just imported this directed network. So I'm looking down here in the console, just a couple of tips here. What we can see is that it's a directed network. So this DN stands for that. It's got 125 nodes in it, and there are 510 connections or ties, right? Then we have all of this great attributional data for the nodes, right? So the name, which is just going to be the ID, whether they took it, everything that showed up in nodes over here was imported as a nodal attribute, okay? Down here for the edges, we have the connection. So this is the same. If we jumped over here to ties, we have 1 to 9, 1 to 13. You're going to see that down here, right? And then it goes on and on and on, right? So that is the graph object, okay? This is the basic thing that you need to be able to run, measures of centrality, density, all of those great statistics that you can pull. But what we're going to do next is we're going to visualize this, right? So we're just going to do a really basic plot of this graph, right? And the function for that is just plot and then insert your graph object, right? And so we're going to add a few more parameters in a second, but I want to show you what this looks like just really in a basic sense, right? So plot G, right? And you should get something like this. So give me a thumbs up whenever you have this on your screen, whenever you have the graph object, right? Carrie, Steve, thanks. Ben, awesome. Thanks, Dominic. Yes. All right, others, if you need me to answer any questions or address any issues, feel free to unmute yourself or ask the question in the chat. Okay, so this basic graph object, it's a little bit difficult to read right off the bat because you've got the names are showing up, which are just the ID numbers, and then it's really clustered in the middle, and you can start to kind of see the arrows. So this is just using the pre-formatted parameters in the package. So it's really basic, and there's some things that we can do to make it look just a little bit better before we get into overlapping groups, right? So the next step that I have here is I'm going to introduce quite a few more parameters, and the way that I've organized this starts off at the broadest level of the network, right? So it's same function of plot and then our same object, but now I'm going to give it the parameters of I want it to use a specific kind of layout, all right? So these layout in iGraph, like this one that I have highlighted here, I'm not going to try and give the name. It uses different algorithms for how to place the nodes and the connections on the plot. This is one of the more common ones. But you can also do it where it shows up as a circle. There's just different algorithms that they've developed. Then I have it set to where it's going to rescale everything. I'm giving it the ratios, the margins, and then I want it to add a title. Okay. The next thing that I have the way that I organize this is just different labels about, or different parameters about the nodes or the vertices, okay? So I don't want it to put on any labels because I don't need to know the numbers. I can tell it what color, what the size, and all of that good stuff, okay? And then down here, I want it to, for the connections, for the edges, I want it to narrow down the width. I want it to make a smaller arrow, all of that good stuff, okay? So we can run this and we should get a little bit better of a visual, right? Give me a thumbs up whenever you've got this on your screen. Richard, thanks. Steve. What do we think? Is it a little bit better to read than the first one? Yeah. Okay, so you can see arrows are pointing, they're indicating the direction of the tie, right? What we can also notice with this different layout here is you can see there's these dots, these nodes that are on the side here. These are isolated nodes in the network, okay? So they're not connected to anyone. Yeah, so we're telling a little bit better of a story. I like the big loopy tie. Okay. All right. So yeah, this tells one story, right? But there's more data that can tell a more complete story, right? And so this is kind of the big point for why whenever we're doing network visualization, we can integrate other data, right? So we can plot in data such as like the geographic location of the organization and then put that on a geopolitical map, and it tells a really interesting story. So a client of mine, they've been really working hard to develop relationships in the Southern Hemisphere. They're a northern-based collection of NGOs, and they wanted to understand how their connections are in the Southern Hemisphere. So this really helped tell a great story, all right? So whenever we're talking about like why you should care about network visualization, is, in the basic sense, we're telling a viewer how things are connected. But whenever we're just focusing simply on nodes and how they're connected, we're missing out in other ways that nodes can be connected, right? And so whenever we start to look at how other ways nodes are connected, we begin to think about things of in-group and out-group ties. So thinking of the issues, the network that we're working with here, is we could start to see of these NGOs in our network, what issues, I'm just going to pull up how the data are right here for the organizational issue. We can start to see maybe there are other connections that an organization has. So like organization 1 here is connected to, this is Indigenous persons and minority reforms, and then this is institutional reforms, are the 2 issues that they work on, right? And so we might want to show how nodes in a network are connected to these issues. And now one of the ways that most people will first go to is they will go to creating a sociogram or a network graph that looks at the in-group, out-group ties. But this is really, really messy, okay? There's a lot that's going on here. You have the different color of ties that are showing the different issues, right? If you want to run this, I left this in the script just in case it would be helpful, but it's after we have to restructure the data, which I just forgot about. So yeah, so what we're going to do next is we're going to just quickly create this graph to kind of look at the in-group, out-group ties, right? So the problem that we have is the way that our data are structured. We just need to quickly reshape them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an object that's going to house the data that we need. So we just need to identify the nodes. So we're going to do ID and then the 2 issues that they work on. And we're going to call this object issues work on, okay? Give you a quick look of what that looks like, right? So you have your ID and the issues that each organization works on. Then we need to quickly reshape it. All right, I'm gonna quickly reshape this. All right, so this is just from dplyr for those of you who aren't familiar with this. What I'm doing here is I'm just creating a new object from the object that I just created up here, but I'm pivoting it longer, right? So up top, you've got this in a wide format, but I need it in a long format. So I just used the pivot longer function in dplyr, told it which columns I want it to reshape and where I want it to put those. So names 2 puts it down into order, and then where I want the values. Okay, so the values from here, from organization issue 1 and 2, they're going to populate down here, and it's going to repeat the ID for me. Okay, so now what I want to do, just to make it a little bit better on the graph, is I want to rename all of these acronyms that I have. So if you run this line or these lines of code, it'll rename that. And then I need to create another object, right? So this object is where we're going to show the within edges, right? So we're going to look at all the connections within groups. Okay, so this is, I'm not going to explain this, it's a little bit more complicated, but I'm just doing it to show you the connections. So here we've got, again, just another set of ties, right? We can see the orgs that it's from and to, and then the issue that they work on, okay? So now what we need to do is we need to create a new object, okay, that has these within group ties, right? So we're going to add a column to our ties, right? So we just added a column for issue. We're going to bind those in, right? So we're going to create another object that is just the ties within. All right, so we have 2 different objects that we're working with right now. All right, so here is what the ties within groups looks like. So we have the from and to, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're just going to filter out any cases where there was no issue, right? Okay, so it's blank. All right, so hopefully you're able to keep up. I'm moving a little fast because I'm looking at the clock here. But now what we want to do is we want to create a new graph object that's specifically for the within group ties, right? So we just did that, and then what we're going to do next is we are going to use the GG graph to help visualize those within ties. So this is basically setting up the different colors for each of the ties. Okay, right. Now what we should be able to do is if we hit, yeah, there we go. You should get something that looks like this with GG graph, right? So again, this is what I have in the slides, right? So sometimes you might find this helpful. You might find it helpful to look at the connections by plotting out all of the connections within a group and without a group, okay? But for me, I think that this it gets really, really messy. So there is another way of doing this where we could take these nodes that are like in the green here or the pink, and we can make it a super node and show how those nodes might fit in different kind of super nodes is the way that I describe it, right? So we're going to basically show where do they overlap, right? And so here's just a preview of what we're going to do. I've done this in telling stories about in a study where we were looking at how authors that were researching engagement, there's like 10 different ways that people have studied engagement. And we wanted to show the different authors that had talked about engagement in multiple ways. And so we were able to show the connections between the authors here, but then also show that some of these authors worked with multiple types of engagement, right? But for the focus of what we're going to do for our time that we have left is we're going to go back and we are going to look at specifically the overlapping groups, right? So we need to create another object here that is looking at the nodes within groups, okay? So what I need to do is create another object that goes back to where I was reshaping from the pivot wide to pivot long, pivot longer. I want to take that object, and all I want to do is I want to select the ID and the issue that the organizations were working on, right? So here is what that looks like, right? So you have the ID and the issue that they're working on. Then what I need to do is I need to create 3 other objects that indicate the ID of the groups, okay? So this is where we're going to use the lapply on the object that we just created up here. We're going to split that by issue, okay? And then we're going to group we're going to run this by ID, okay? The next thing, once we have our group ID, we're then going to tell it to use the Brewer package, and it's going to put in a predefined, I'm using set3 set of color schemes. And then we're going to tell it how much do we want it to fill in terms of transparency, the visual, which will make sense in a second. So I'm going to run all of these together. Okay, so we've got a whole new set of objects over here, right? Now we're gonna visualize it. Okay, the only change that I have here is I've added this parameter or the function of simplify within the plot. Okay, so I'm going to run that, and the reason why I did that simplify is it just helps remove any of the isolated nodes out of the plot. Okay, so here is what the plot should look like. Whoops, wrong screen. All right, so now what we have, actually I didn't remove the isolates like I thought it was going to, but what you have is you have got the nodes, so that you should see the nodes and the connections between them. Looks familiar, what we covered earlier, but now we have these shaded areas, okay? These different shaded areas represent the different issues that they worked on, But because a node can be a member of multiple issues, we want to show where they are overlapping, right? The other thing that this does is it can show us what issues seem to be most central to the network, right? So you've got this orange shaded area, right? Kind of indicating, seems like a lot of organizations work on this issue. So what we can do is we can come back and we can run the legend, right? So the legend is going to appear here and it's going to tell us what each of those issues are. Just as a tip, I run this like 3 or 4 times just to make the color appear a little bit more prominent for the label. So if you jump back, we should be able to see we've got these issues listed with the color, okay? Right? And we can see what issues have the most overlap. So media orgs, right? So those working on media reforms, they seem to be most central. So quite a few of these nodes are part of that group, but they could also have been a part of another dominant issue, which looks like institutional reforms in the red here, okay? So this helps tell a story about the connections in a way that brings in another level of attributional data. And it kind of gets at more of the complexities of how the nodes are connected. But this specific type of visualization recognizes that members can be in multiple groups, right? So those are the things that I wanted to cover, and I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions. And it looks like Ben might have a question. So if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, Ben, I'll take that. Ben?
Hey, thank you. This was great. I just wondered if you have any like guidelines for the number of nodes that make up for like a good visual, or the number of like groupings, like
Yeah.
I've got data with, 40,000 individuals. Like that seems like it's not going to be useful. Like, is there sort of a guideline amongst people who do this frequently?
Yeah, there's not a set guideline. I've seen some terrible sociograms where people have just thrown 30,000 nodes into a network. So one of the things that I generally will do is I will remove nodes like if they don't meet a certain level of degree centrality. So sometimes in my network visuals, I will, if you bring in like the metrics for each node that you can assign, you can say, I'm going to only visualize the nodes that had at least the mean or the median degree centrality. And so that can really kind of make the amount of nodes smaller and still tell a story or show a story about how people are connected. So that's one tip. I don't know if it would work with, you said 30-some thousand nodes, but it might. Right?
Anybody else have questions for Adam?
Yeah. So I see that the pivot longer and the data wrangling is helpful. That took a long time to figure out, but glad it's helpful for you all. So hopefully it removes a headache. Ben, do you have another question?
I always have questions.
Okay,
Forgive
great.
me.
Thank you.
Like your example, the nodes were of similar types. Like I could imagine the same graph where your node was instead like civil service reforms, and you looked at how those different nodes of another mode, as you said,
Yep.
connect to it. Like, do you have an example to see what that kind of a visual might look like?
Where the
where you have nodes of different modes that are connected. I'm just curious what, like, because that seems to be another way you could look at
how the issues
connections across different network types or different attributes.
Yeah, that is a good question. I can't think of one off the fly right now, but if you send me an email, I will find one. I have hundreds of visuals, and I'm sure I've got one that I can pull out. I just can't think of one off the top of my head. So, yeah.
Great. Adam, I have a question for you.
Thanks.
So, I mean, I'm just sort of curious, and I could have asked this to Curie as well, but, you know, there's sort of like a lot of data wrangling and, you know, statistics stuff going on in the background. Was that sort of like a huge part of your like dissertation work, or is it, how did you sort of fall into that, I guess?
Into the data wrangling?
Yeah, or just
Yeah.
even like all the network stuff.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that is, I could write a book on this. So I did my dissertation. I did not do my dissertation using R. I used a software called UCINet, which was a complete disaster because it's very limiting. It only runs on Windows. It's, you know, the visuals are quite bad. So I've learned network over the last, or I've learned how to do network analysis in R over the last 5 years. Specifically, the issues about data wrangling came from wanting to tell a better story about how the networks were connected. So I had this question about showing the different ways that organizations, because I usually study organizations, how they are situated in their issues. Specifically, I was looking at the shared meaning that's produced, and I wanted to be able to visualize that there are these different kind of shared values among them, but I wasn't able to show that in the connections because I was wanting to show the directionality. It was already getting too much to focus on that. So what I did is I just started searching around to see how other people had visualized it, and then I needed to wrangle the data and learn dplyr, and like 6 months later I was able to finally put the visual together. So
That's awesome.
yeah, so not very specific, but kind of general story. So yeah, other questions? All right, well, I hope this was useful for everyone. If you have questions about how to use network data, or if you think you have relational data, I am more than happy to share the code. I teach a class on network analysis in R. So I have like very basic scripts for putting together data from surveys. I even have it from content analyses, and even like scraping Twitter or getting Twitter data and showing how nodes from there are connected. So I'm happy to be a resource moving forward. So yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you don't have data, but you think this might be useful, I'm also happy to jump on Zoom and brainstorm ways of doing network research. So.
Great. Well, thanks so much for the talk and for being willing to share so much with us. This, you know, pretty much concludes our conference. So I'm going to stick around in this room for a while. If anyone has questions for me, I can hopefully answer a lot of them. Otherwise, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I know we're all a little bit tired of Zoom conferences, perhaps. So I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure our speakers do as well.
Yeah.
So thanks to all of you for that. You can head out whenever you want, or again, I'll stick around here. Thanks again.